established. We can call it here, guys. Now, I guess I'll go ahead and kick things off. Thank you so much to everyone who's tuning in for another episode of what I'm tentatively calling the Patrick Miller Podcast and/or Stream Show. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, Mariel Cartwright. Hi, Mariel.
Hi.
I will go ahead and introduce you the way I know you, and then you can go ahead and fill in whatever blanks I leave, because I'm bad at summing up how awesome people are. So I know you actually through like game dev circles. I believe I met you through Brandon and Persona and like the rest of the kind of associated, I don't know, I think of them as the insert credit crew, but clearly by now it's more than that, right?
Yeah.
And I remember being super intimidated by you at first because you like didn't say much. But you don't play it off shy so much as like super cool, right? And so it's like, oh man, like I'm never gonna be able to interact with this person.
It's more that I'm just terrified, like all the time in public.
Well, so I eventually came to learn that you're quiet more because you're a huge dork, and after that I feel like things went pretty much swimmingly. But I know you best as both the lead animator on Skullgirls. I believe you were part of the illustrious Power 50 in a list of Game Developer Magazine put together. That was basically me. And you also did some of the illustrations for my book, which I'm super thankful for. But it's so that's predominantly how I know you, but I feel like the world knows you through a few different channels or work. So like, what did I miss, right? What else, like, what are you working on? What have you been working on? Like, I know Mecha Fetus is a thing.
Right.
I actually subjected my team at Riot to a screening of Kings of Power, which traumatized them in a great way.
I would hope so, yeah.
But what I missed?
Okay, well, I guess I started, I think people who have followed my work, I guess, from the beginning, know my stuff from the Mecha Fetus visual blog, which was me, John Kim / Persona, Paul Robertson, EU03, and Rad Rappy. And it was just a place where we posted whatever, really. It was just a place for us to post our art that like wasn't DeviantArt or, whatever. And I think, I don't know how, I think it's because Paul already had a bit of a following, but people discovered that pretty quick.
Yeah.
And
around
so we
when
had...
was that? Like, what time period were you doing the Mecha Fetus stuff, mostly?
I think it was like 2006 or 7 to... Like, it sucks because I don't want to say that it's gone.
Sure.
Or we're not going to come back to it, but we haven't posted on it in a few years.
Yeah, all of y'all are doing other things right now. Right,
yeah.
So, yeah, not to say it's dormant, but if its peak activity was around 2006, that gives me a pretty good idea.
Yeah. I think 2009, 2010 were, like, good years for it.
Gotcha. Cool. What else?
And, yeah, from there, let's see, I was in college throughout a lot of that. College was 05 to 09. And then right at the end of college, I started working on Scott Pilgrim. I started taking like freelance video game jobs and stuff. And Scott Pilgrim came from Paul, who Ubisoft asked to work on it. And then Paul brought on John and I to do that. And that was just like one of my earliest video game jobs. Not that it's been very long, honestly.
I mean, I feel like you're in that spot right now. Like, since you said you were in college around, it was like 09-ish?
05 to 09,
05 to 09. So you're probably at the spot right now where you've gone from being like the like young artist that the people in their late 20s and early 30s are like, oh my god, like how could someone so talented be so young, to now feeling that, right?
Well, yes, I do feel that. I friggin' go on Tumblr and you see, the most beautiful work, and then you think like, oh, this person, they probably work for like Pixar or DreamWorks or something crazy. Like, where do they work? That's so cool. And then you look at their profile and they're like 14.
That experience, specifically going on Tumblr, or I guess I feel like Tumblr is where most of the art kids are these days, and Deviant has a slightly older crowd, but like that experience is something I've heard about a lot, specifically from illustrators and animators and anyone who works in a visual medium, right? They're always like, man, there's a kid out there who's like, as good or better as the stuff that I'm doing now, and they're 14, and that's not fair.
Yeah.
Um, well, welcome to old, Mariel. It happens to all of us. So,
Oh my god.
the anchor point for all the conversations that I have on the stream are fighting games, right? And so I remember when I found out that you were working on Skullgirls, and then as I grew to learn more about Skullgirls' kind of pedigree, both from like a design perspective and a lot of Mike Z's work as well as the art stuff, it was super fascinating to me that like you didn't have a tremendously strong background with fighting games, and you were tasked with an extraordinarily animation intensive fighting game, right? Like,
Right.
This isn't like a just like a simple job, right? Skullgirls set the bar for 2D animation for a lot of folks, right? So I want to know a little bit about your I guess your fighting game origin story. Let's start there, and then we'll go into like how you kind of had to level up and adapt for Skullgirls.
So let's see. I've been playing games my whole life. Like my dad had an Atari 800 that I would play.
God damn.
Yeah, a lot of people don't even know what it is. Like people think of the 2600 or something, but we had an 800 that had a keyboard and stuff. So I was playing that, when I was super young, and then when I was 6, my parents got me a Genesis.
Okay.
And on the Genesis, I had Street Fighter 2.
Oh god.
Yeah.
So you had the Genesis version of Street Fighter 2. Did it come with the 6-button controller or no? I don't remember.
It didn't come with it, but we had one.
Okay.
Another one, yeah.
Just one though. So
Yes.
whoever you played against had to do the like start button to swap punches and kicks.
I didn't play with anyone. That's the
Okay.
whole thing. Yeah,
Gotcha.
I just played by myself and by against the CPU. And so I played that a bit. Terrible at it. But then what was it? Turbo that had Cammy?
Yeah.
We talked about
she
this.
she started in Super. So
Super.
it would've
Okay,
been-
that's
yeah.
right. That's right. Yeah, and then Super came out and that had Cammy. And I was always really bummed that Chun-Li was the only girl in the original. And then so they introduced Cammy, but my parents didn't want to buy it for me because I already had the game.
Right. Yeah.
So I would rent it from Blockbuster over and over and over just to play as Cammy because I thought she was super cool. This was when I was, like 7,
Yeah.
probably.
Do you remember like looking back what it was that drew you to Cammy specifically?
I don't know. She just seemed super cool. She seemed super strong. I liked her hair. I liked her moves. Just everything about her was like appealing to me for some reason. Like I like Chun-Li too, but I guess I started with Chun-Li and then Cammy was like the newcomer that was like super interesting.
Right.
So I think that was kind of it.
Gotcha. Yeah. I always hear about Chun as like.
Yeah.
As pretty much every woman I've talked to who played Street Fighter growing up at some point was like, oh, I'm gonna pick Chun-Li, right? She's formative. Like she has a special place in a lot of people's hearts.
Right.
I know very few people who ascribe a similar meaning to Cammy, and so that's I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
that was the character that kind of bit you, especially if you're renting the game, right? Like that's repeated. It's not like you got enough Cammy off of one transaction. You had to go back to the Blockbuster or whatever and be like,
right.
Give me this again. I need my Cammy fix. Okay. So from there was it basically like fighting games are just like any other game, and maybe you played it, maybe you didn't until Skullgirls, or were there any other kind of notable pit stops along the way?
I think the whole thing about me in fighting games is that I've never been very competitive.
Sure.
Just because I'm terrible. Whatever I'm playing with or against someone, I will cause them to lose or I will lose. Which is great because I love Monster Hunter, which is best in teams, and I just drag everyone down. But yeah, so I'm terrible at competitive games, and so I love watching fighting games. I love all the craft and the art and the work that goes into them, but I'm just terrible at them. I did buy DOA 1. I think I was, what was that, like 98, 99-ish?
Yeah, I want to say late 90s.
Yeah. So I think I was like 13 or 14 then. And I read about the boob slider in I think it was GameFan or maybe like PSM or something. Yeah. I looked it up and I really liked Lei Feng, who was like in the middle of the cover. And I just liked her design a lot, and I ended up getting that, and I played the first DOA a bunch. Still terrible, but again, I just kind of more wanted to look at it.
Sure.
Um, and then apart from that, I would play, like whatever Street Fighter was at the time with other friends. I would play some Soul Calibur, kind of like jumping around, but nothing really like super grabbed me. I did love watching Guilty Gear.
Yeah.
Yeah, which like the first time I saw that, it blew my mind because it was like, it looks like an anime. It looks like a full screen anime. And I'd never seen anything like that at the time. So that was super cool.
So I'm interested because, like, again, this is the mode of interacting with fighting games that you're describing is not within the norm, right? Like, and especially if you're looking at a core fighting game audience, typically what we assume is like a lot of us just see the game as like hitboxes and hurt boxes, and if there's pretty pictures attached to it, whatever, right? And so to listen to you say, oh, I just like to look at it, like, was it that you like sat down and played through arcade mode, but you didn't really care if you won or you lost, or like try and paint a picture for me about like what's going on in your brain when you were like 13 years old and playing DOA and like what you got out of it.
Yeah, I didn't care if I won or lost. I would play it on easy or whatever, and I would just kind of like get through it to keep watching it. I would love watching other people play. And someone would ask me to play with them, and I'd be like, no. Sorry. It's not going to be fun for either of us.
So then what would draw you to a fighting game over like getting, I mean, you could have done the same thing with like, I don't know, Final Fantasy, right? Or an MMO or like there are all kinds of things. Like why, what would draw you to fighting games specifically?
I think it would either be, like in the case of DOA, I really just was immediately drawn to Lei Fang, the first Street Fighter, Cammy. So a lot of the time, it's the characters. But then I would still see like Third Strike or Guilty Gear and just go, oh my god, that art is amazing. I just want to look at the animation. Darkstalkers too. Yeah, like 2D animated games, I feel bad saying this. I feel like I'm revealing something horrible. But like I enjoy playing them enough, but I'm not into playing them. Sure. I just want to watch them because of all the freaking awesome craft that goes into it.
Yeah. So, and again, this is me trying to kind of like open up your brain a little bit and see what's going on. But like when you say you're drawn to a character, what does that mean? Like, and to kind of unpack where I'm coming from. I've had conversations with people where I'm like, okay, what is the identity behind this character? And they're like, well, he has a fireball and a dragon punch. And I'm like, okay, that's an identity from like one relatively narrow swath of how you describe a character, right? So like when you say you're drawn to a character, like is it like the mood that you're extrapolating from their appearance? Is it like the language that you get out of kind of their emotions? Like what draws you to Lei Fang over any other characters?
I think it might just be like a visual design thing. Like I like the simplicity of Lei Fang's hair. She has kind of like that ponytail that's very like square cropped at the end. Her outfit is just like a simple black leather one piece. Like it's a very simple, iconic design. I really hate that they ditched it in like 2? Like immediately they're like, no, never mind. We're gonna make her, very traditional Chinese looking.
Yeah.
Maybe actually that was a little bit of it in the first one where she was an Asian character who didn't dress in like Chinese clothing or like kind of like typical. That might have been like it's hard to say my relationship with Chun-Li. Just that like I think she's a great design. She's a super iconic design. But like just the typical Chinese dress versus like Lei Fang's wearing something kind of different. Like it's hard to articulate like what about that attracts me more to Lei Fang than Chun-Li.
I mean that makes sense, especially like if you look at the trend that Street Fighter 2 started with like the World Warriors, right? So everyone's wearing their national identity.
Yeah, and that's true. Sleeve. That's a big part of it.
Like I can see how Chun-Li would be super. It can be super compelling for people to see. Hey, this is something that like like is an iconic representation of me in a fighting game, and that's awesome. But like you can also see, and I think we see this with Balrog a little bit, right? Is that like or Blanca actually? Like I've spoke with both like Black people and Brazilians who are like, I like that there's a Black dude or a Brazilian in a fighting game, but how come it had to be like Mike Tyson or a monster, right?
Right.
So so then your connection with that character gets complicated. Right, yeah. Where something is like Lei Fang, like I'm actually not familiar with their DOA one outfit, but that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's super cute. It's so like it's such a big bummer to me that they ditched it. Yeah, so in terms of like what I'm attracted to in characters, I think it is just like a visual thing. You know, I guess personality-wise, like both Cammy and Lei Fang are just like cool and collected and, you know, badass. They're not like too cutesy. They don't cry. You know, I guess everyone in Street Fighter cries when they lose, but yeah, it's mostly like a visual and then a little bit of an attitude thing.
Yeah, it's. I mean, not to belabor the point, but I'm just fascinated how like Cammy's personality cues in Super Street Fighter are not that pronounced, right? It's like the tone of her voice is basically what it comes down to, right? Like. And I guess like her animations, her attacks are super decisive and committal, right? And it's so fascinating to me that you could connect so strongly with something that's relatively subtle in terms of like a design facet, right? Like it's not like you get like hours of cutscenes or VO to connect to Cammy as like this cool, calm, collected character. It's just like, you know, a couple win quotes and some voice bites, and that's it.
Yeah.
As an aside, I don't know if you've played, I think it's called Cannon Spike, but Cammy was in a... Okay, good.
Yeah, she's super cute in that.
Yeah, well, to the stream audience, if you haven't played Cannon Spike, go and at least watch some YouTube footage of it if you want to see Cammy in action. I think she's on rollerblades and shooting stuff. It's like a Smash TV style top-down shooter. Yeah, they had that at Sunnyvale for a while. It was great. So that's the TLDR Mariel's kind of like fighting game origin story. Now let's talk a little bit about working on Skullgirls and like you know kind of how the way I framed it earlier was like you know animation of course is already a labor intensive craft, but you know if you look at like the demands of traditional like cartoon animation for film or TV or whatever, you don't have to worry with the audience directly interacting, or they have no causative connection to the animation that's going on, right? So I'm wondering, like, how did you get started, kind of unpacking what it meant to work on a fighting game? And like, Skullgirls is not your average fighting game, right? Like, it's mechanically intense. It's designed with, you know, like, with a very kind of strong rooting in the tradition, like the traditions of the series and stuff. Like, what was it like to work on it? And did you find yourself running into like, I guess, craft challenges that you hadn't anticipated?
Well, I think part of the reason I work in video games and not just film or movies at all, like the biggest thing is that I just love video games. But for some reason, I find it super rewarding that someone can press a button and something I did happens.
That's so cool.
And something about like, you know, working around the restrictions that have to be in place to make that happen, like the way it should work. I find that challenge like super interesting. And so, yeah, just doing like game animation for some reason just feels super rewarding and challenging in the right way. So that's why I kind of do it over just like animating for Disney or something. But I guess, like, I first started with Scott Pilgrim. And honestly, it's not terribly different animating for, like, a brawler versus a fighting game. At least in like, 2D ones, which is the only things I have experience with. Because in the end, you know, the player presses a button and he expects a reaction in a certain amount of time. He expects it to do a certain thing. And that's just true across all video games. So, you know, going from like a brawler like Scott Pilgrim to a fighting game like Skullgirls actually isn't terribly different. Though, you know, Skullgirls just paying attention to like the number of frames and like where it's hitting and all that stuff, it's a lot more specific.
Yeah.
But in terms of like just the mental approach, it's not terribly different. It's just kind of like fine tuning a little bit more or less.
Mm-hmm. So then, how was the process of like, well, like you said, attack data in fighting games pretty much defines the core of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did it start like, what was the process like with you and kind of whoever was working on characters or moves? Was it like, oh, I have these ideas? Did you start with concepts for moves that later turned into attacks and kind of met the designer halfway, or was it the other way around? Like, oh, I need a normal that does this, this, and this. Okay, here we go.
Well, just in general, the way making moves for Skullgirls works is that the artists kind of like all come together and brainstorm just a bunch of moves that they think would look awesome for the character to do.
Yeah.
Just no limits, just anything. Just kind of trying to keep in mind, like, well, she needs to punch, she needs to kick, she needs some supers, and all that stuff. And then we pass that on to Mike, Mike Z, who's the designer of Skullgirls, who is just like the brain behind everything gameplay related at our company. And he takes that and he goes, I have this list of moves. I choose this punch. I'm going to choose this kick. And he just goes through the entire, brainstorm that everyone came up with, and he chooses the ones he wants. And, he already has an idea of like how each thing works. If nothing fits, like a certain normal he wants, then he'll tell us like, oh, I need something that does this. So then he comes up and he gives us back that list of like just everything that he wants the character to do. And when we started, the way we started animating Skullgirls made it actually a lot harder than it ended up being.
Okay.
Where we would first just draw the keyframes. So it's just like if you're throwing a punch, you start here, and then you start or end there, and then you go back to idle. And we would just give Mike those 3 frames, and he would put them in game, and then he would tell us how many frames like he wanted in between.
Yeah. And
then that's kind of how we would work on it. But sometimes it would end up that it just didn't quite work, or things needed to be changed like over and over again. There was like more back and forth, and it was actually kind of difficult to just go from keys in the game to the full animation. So what we ended up doing is that John Persona and I would animate the entire move. So we would just do the full motion, give that to Mike, and he would kind of like work around it. He would take out frames. He would just kind of like, I don't know, rustle it into the way he wanted, and then we would go back for fixes. And it was just less passes on fixes to animate the whole thing at the start. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
You're making a lot of sense.
Okay.
I don't know if you're making sense to the audience, but as someone who's working with both designers and animators on a fighting game, you're making sense to me. So that's
cool.
Good. But what I'm wondering here is, how literate is Mike in terms of animation? Like, was he able to speak to you in your language, or?
You know what?
Yeah.
That's something that I'm so grateful for in Mike, is that he might not understand like animation terminology or just like all like the 12 principles and all this stuff, but he has such a good and thorough understanding of how fighting games work that a lot of times he would help us fix our animations to make them work more like other fighting games.
Yeah. Did he just send you like animated GIFs from like Fighter's Generation or something?
Oh my God, constantly. He says, I want it to work like this, and it works like this because of this and this. It has this many frames in it. This is why it does what it does.
Yeah.
And so much of what I learned just came from him telling me, like, this is X number of frames, and it works because of this reason. And do that in your animation. And a lot of times he's fixing the timing on my animations. Like, I don't think I could have done any of what I did, like, without his input. It's pretty crazy.
No, I swear to God, like, the sentence that I hear most often in fighting games is, all right, so here's how they do it in Guilty Gear. And then...
It's funny because I don't know anyone else that could just rattle off exact frame counts of certain moves from some random game. And just, it's not even fighting games. Like, he could do that about Metroid, just any game he's passionate about,
Yep.
he will just dissect and know in and out. It's really fascinating.
It's amazing to me how much we can learn. I mean, I use fighting games as my specific example because, like, everything I learned in game design, and which admittedly is not that much yet, but it's there, is from playing fighting games at a high level, right? And it's like there's something about the medium that just forces us to engage with everything so strongly that you end up learning something from it. I was thinking another example I was thinking was Guilty Gear and sound design. Like, Arc System Works fighters, I don't know how many of them you've played besides Guilty Gear, but they tend to be super chatty, right? And that's kind of like how we think of, like, any Japanese fighting game. You hear a lot of, like, just the same old, like, Sasuke or whatever, like, over and over and over, right? But, like, for the players, that soundscape is giving them important information. Oh, I know based off of this sound sample that he's doing this right here, and then he's going to do this right here, and so on and so on. And, like, sound design is not something I've ever thought about until I started playing fighting games, right? And same with animation. Like, just being able to understand, like, stuff like hit stop, and then thinking, okay, well, where would I want this move to stop and accentuate? Like, I feel like that gives you insight into, like, the concept of stuff like keyframes, for example.
Right.
Man, that's cool. So, like, now you're working on Indivisible, and I'm wondering, like, do you have to relearn anything significant going from Skullgirls to Indivisible? Is it easier to work in that format than it was in fighting games? Like, what does the kind of skill transfer look like for you?
I have to let go a little bit.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of cases in our game, which is like a Metroid RPG crossover hybrid kind of thing. Where, like, in an RPG, a move should happen in generally like a certain amount of time, but the specific amount of frames doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Because they're going to dash to their target, they're going to do their thing, and then dash back, and it doesn't have to be super responsive. So, I keep going into animations thinking, like, oh, when does this have to hit? How many frames should I take? And it actually doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
Now that I'm saying that, I'm scared I'm going to, like, forget everything I learned on Skullgirls. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't have to be, like, so hands-on.
Like, does it make it harder for you? I'm wondering, because we're operating in a situation of relative constraint, right? Where you're like, okay, there are these technical factors I need to worry about, and for players, that these technical factors in Skullgirls defines basically whether they enjoy the game, right? Like, if notoriously the Sagat's Crouching Fierce in Capcom vs. SNK 2, if, like, the artist and designer working on that move had just spent another, like, 10 seconds on it, the game balance would have been changed irrevocably, right? So, like, that's the stakes you're playing with in Skullgirls. Is it weird to go to, like, relatively low constraint?
It's not weird. It's a little relieving. But I guess the new challenge that we have in Exchange that's not, like, gameplay related is that we just have a lot more different things to animate. Like, each character's moveset is just a tiny fraction of what one Skullgirls character would be. And that, plus, like, we have a lot more characters to animate. Now we have to animate, like, monsters and bosses, and so like, coming down to, like, the specific gameplay of each one, while it matters, it's not quite as intense as Skullgirls, but yeah, in Exchange, we just have a ton of shit to do now.
So to go back to Skullgirls for another minute, were there any cases of, like, either characters or specific moves that stood out as, like, man, that was a pain in the ass, or man, I learned a lot, or anything like that? Like, any stories you'd like to tell?
Let's see. I think at the beginning, I definitely erred on the side of over-animating, which is not what you should do. Like, toward the end, I just got, like, so efficient with, like, the frames I was choosing, whereas in the beginning, when I was just coming from, like, a background in traditional animation, just at CalArts and stuff, my focus was actually on making just everything as smooth as possible. And that just meant I actually ended up over-animating a ton of stuff. And the two things that come to mind were, I don't know the official moves for any Skullgirls, like, characters' attacks, the official names, because we always
they all have names.
Yeah, they all have names, but we never called them that in
Yeah,
development. Like they were always named after we were done, so I don't know what anything is called.
yeah.
But Sarabella has a move where she picks up a diamond,
Hmm.
throws it in the sky, and then it falls, and then she does this like what big wind up punch thing.
Yeah,
Um, and I don't know why I did it the way I did. Like honestly, I really just like over animated it. For some reason, it was so slow, and then it kind of like sped up a little bit, and it was slow again. And I think I was trying to go for like this big tense wind up,
yeah. Hmm.
but it just looked slow. Um, and I animated it. Mike took out like a bunch of frames, and even still in game, it's just like, why is she moving like this? It's really weird. Um, and it's just one of those things where it's like, I wish I could redo it because I know so much more
Hmm.
now. And the other thing is that every character has a hit stun where she gets hit, she flinches, and then she falls to her knees, and then she falls on the ground, just her knee fall.
Yeah.
And for hit stuns, the frame counts for hit stuns are the same across all characters. So if the standing mid hit stun is like 8 frames for Philia, it's 8 frames for everyone.
Right.
Which was an interesting challenge for animating like Big Band, who's so huge, who you'd think would need more frames, but
Right.
you can't have them. So for Philia, I animated this knee fall, and because it was the first knee fall we animated, um, the number of frames I animated set that number for the rest of Skullgirls, and I completely over animated it.
Oof.
Her knee fall is, I think, 21 frames, which when we have moves that are like 5, 6, or 7, maybe averaging around 12, that her knee
That feels like a
falls,
long time.
yeah, it is. Um, and it's long and it's kind of wobbly, and I'm not really a big fan of it. And that was just something that we had to deal with for the rest of Skullgirls because I
Boy.
made it 21 frames at the very start just because I didn't know any better. So that's cool.
Well, I hope that you one day work on another fighting game, if only so you can reuse all the knowledge that you've accumulated from Skull Girls.
Yeah.
So I do want to dive. I want to talk briefly about Indivisible, and I want to dive into your kind of your history of animation because both of those things are incredibly interesting to me. But before I talk Indivisible, you had to come prepared. So the rule for this show, for anyone who's a first-time viewer, is that I love talking to people about the stuff they're working on, but I also want them to plug something else. Right. And so I gave you a homework assignment to come with a shout out prepped for something that you're not working on. So what's on your mind? What you got?
So I thought since we're talking about Indivisible, it would be appropriate to kind of give a big shout out to all of our crossover characters. We have, I think it was like 9 crossover characters in Indivisible. And a lot of the games are out already. But Battle Chasers was one. That just wrapped up its Kickstarter. And that was the game that actually kind of kicked off this like crossover thing that we were doing. So Battle Chasers is looking awesome. I'm not sure when it'll be out, but they've been like posting updates and it looks super cool. And I think the other game that's not out yet was the new Shantae, Half-Genie Hero.
Ah, yes. Did you work on that one?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
They had me animating Shantae at the very start, and I think they ended up having to redo a lot of the animations because they switched the way they animate.
Gotcha.
But they're still based on my animations.
Cool.
So those are the 2 games that are not out yet, I think. Oh, no, Hyperlight Drifter, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hyperlight. Shout outs to Teddy Diefenbach, wherever you are. Come on, we want to play Hyperlight.
So yeah, I think those are not out. The rest might be. But yeah, I mean, those are all games that helped us out by kind of like crossing our fan bases. So I thought it'd be cool to say hi to them.
Yay! That's awesome. I mean, like just seeing indies learn to collaborate with each other with stuff like this is amazing to me, right? Because like, and this is me soapboxing for a second, but like the vast majority of us who go and make our own things in games, like the IP will never be like the core selling point, right? Like I love Skullgirls and I love the characters. I don't see it becoming the next Marvel anytime soon, or the next DC, right? So like seeing people be a little bit less like I guess, protective of their characters, more willing to show them in other games and other contexts, to me is super, like, that's the kind of shit that like, to me, that's a reason to have indie games, right? Is like the stuff that Nintendo is just starting to do with Smash Brothers and bringing in other licensed characters into Smash Brothers. Like, we should have been doing that from day one. So that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's super exciting just because I guess it makes you realize that, like, oh, I look up to all these games, but then when you're working in games, it's kind of like an even playing field, you know? Like going to so many different GDCs and meeting people that were like my lifelong idols that are now sort of, but maybe, I don't know, kind of my peers, you know? And it's like, it's inspiring and it's humbling and it's just kind of crazy that, you know, now we have these friends that make these awesome games and it's just a matter of going like, hey, we love your stuff. Can we put it in our game? And they're like, yeah, man, go for it. You know, it's super cool.
Yay. Well, excellent shout out. Y'all go check out those games. I want to know, like, with Indivisible, like, what are you looking forward to when it comes to working on Indivisible as an animator, right? Like, what do you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh boy, I can't wait to do this, right?
I think it's the same thing as what's going to be the hardest, but it's animating the different characters. Yeah, everyone's moveset is a lot smaller, so we're going to churn through characters a lot faster.
Okay.
And just the types of things we're going to be animating is so much more varied than Skullgirls. You know, big bosses, animals, monsters, just, you know, lots of different characters. Yeah, I think that's it. That's pretty exciting for me. Yeah. Because on Skullgirls, you know, we would be taking at least 3 months on a character. Sure. And it's just that one character. Sometimes, like Eliza and Big Band took a lot longer. So it would just be months and months and months of animating just this one thing. So to be able to kind of like maybe animate a character in a week or two is actually pretty cool.
Yeah. It occurs to me that, like, if I, and this is again me knowing very little about animation, but it seems two different skill sets, right? So, like, if you go deep, then I imagine when you're articulating a character's personality through their animation, you have to think a lot about, like, a core unifying concept or series of poses or whatever that define this character and communicate their attitude and so on, right? But for something where characters are a little bit more interchangeable, or maybe not interchangeable, but like there's just less stuff to do for any given character, you kind of have to come up with like ideas that work well in, like, oh, this person gets this pose, or like I feel like you'd have fewer venues to show off a character's personality, right? Because any given character will have fewer moves.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you do have to be more specific with, like, you know, oh, you only have 6 moves. We got to make them the coolest looking ones. But I think that's where, like, the character design will help. Where if you have, like, a lot of different and interesting character designs, they'll kind of, like, lend themselves to the moves that they'll do.
Yeah.
And so from that, they'll become different.
So what's good direction for you? And I'm wondering this as someone, like, if I were to, I don't know, spitball designs for 10 Indivisible characters, like, what kind of language speaks best to you when thinking, when like, what do you, what informs your work the best?
I mean, part of it is just, like, working with the right people that you can, like, bounce ideas off really easily. It's definitely more fun to actually, like, talk with each other and be like, oh, that reminds me of this other thing, and, you know, and kind of, like, keep going like that, instead of just being, like, brain dumped, you know, like a huge thing.
Yeah.
But I guess, yeah, if you want to, like, just talk about what you think someone should do, it's helpful to, like, have references and being like, oh, you know, this works this way in this other thing. We should do, like, this variation on it and stuff like that. And it's all about, like, just, like, using your resources to kind of, like, communicate what you want to do. Like, as much as I'd like to think that every idea I have is super original and it came from my heart and my soul and my brain, it's inevitable that we're just inspired by the things that we see. And I think using that to your advantage and just using existing things as a springboard to come up with new stuff. Working that way is much better, I think, than just trying to like make sure no one has thought of your idea ever. It's just like admit that someone's thought of your thing, and work with it, than worrying about trying to like make something new all the time.
I feel like, and this is coming from someone who's like relative newbie when it comes to working professionally in a creative field, but like I from the outside, I think like as a consumer, I have the impression that all artists, like, they just have this rich inner source of ideas, and they sit down inspired, and then boom, you have this new character. And it wasn't until I started working with more creative folks that I got to understand how much of creative work is like iterating and being inspired by other people's work. Right?
Yeah.
The end product might feel totally new, but the way you get there is often informed by like just taking in as much stuff as you can.
Right, and honestly, it's still a hard thing to kind of like come to terms with. Like, I'm terrified of someone discovering that I did this thing that was inspired by something else, and so I'm honestly always thinking like, oh, I got to be original. Like, I don't want someone to think I'm a hack. That's actually like a struggle I have like every day for like everything I do.
Which is totally normal, by the way.
Yeah, and it's something that I think all creatives have to come to term with, where you just have to admit, like, whatever you think of, it's been thought of before.
Yeah.
So what can I do that brings a little bit of myself into this idea and makes it my own? I don't know. It's hard though. Like, my whole life is just like, how do people not discover that I'm actually a gigantic hack? Which is something that I was talking about, like that imposter syndrome thing. Well, very much a victim.
Everyone on stream, you heard it here first. Mariel Cartwright is a gigantic hack.
It's true.
But it's okay. All of us are gigantic hacks. So speaking of your whole life, that is my forced segue into, let's talk about, like, so far we've been talking a lot about your work as an animator. I want to know how you got into it, right? And the backdrop here is I'm fascinated with the process of skill development and acquisition. To me, fighting games were a huge canvas for learning how to get good at something. And a lot of what I learned from fighting games, I later applied to actual martial arts, to writing, to my career, all kinds of other stuff. And so that got me thinking that perhaps like the process of skill acquisition, no matter what kind of skill it is, has some things in common. So I want to know more about like how did you start getting into animation? Like, what was art school like that kind of stuff. So tell me your origin story as a creative, as an animator.
Well, I think I'm very much the product of my parents. Like, I'm very much my parents' kid.
Okay.
My dad was a Disney animator for most of my childhood, and my mom is Japanese. So it was just like this blend of, Japanese culture, Japanese films, just, everything Japanese, combined with my dad is a gigantic nerd. So it's Disney animation. He had the Atari. He was doing like a little bit of programming, and he would get me into video games and stuff. So I think just that was the environment I was brought up in. And I think I'm just a very natural result of it.
So even I'm curious then, like what like I understand the kind of growing up around like nerdy stuff, but why animation out of all the crap? Like, did your dad just park you down with like a flip book or something? You're like, here, you're gonna learn the family trade. Like, how'd you latch onto that?
It's funny actually, because I always drew. I think part of that was being, in an artistic family. My mom is also super artistic. So I always drew, but for most of my teens, I actually thought that I would go into comics. I didn't actually think of animation as something to go into, and I think part of that came from seeing my dad eventually kind of like bounce between different jobs. He would come home with stories about like Suits destroying everything he loved. And so like animation, and I guess in that case it was like big studio film animation,
Right.
didn't seem like somewhere I wanted to be. So I wanted to
Sure.
do art. I grew up reading manga, and just comics in general. So I always assumed that I would just go into comics.
Hmm.
Um, as a teen, I just drew a lot of my own comics. I tried like taking them places that didn't go anywhere because I was terrible. Um, but it wasn't until like the end of high school that I thought like, well, I should try this animation thing anyway. If I learn animation, I'll still learn to storyboard. Like, there's a lot of different disciplines that go into animation, and especially like in animation education, where you'll learn about film, you'll learn about like composition, you'll learn about storyboarding and storytelling. Um, Animation is like this whole huge, all-encompassing thing that it seemed like a good thing to learn. Um, and so I went to CalArts for animation, and it was only then that, like, I don't know how I never thought of it up until that point. Like, I loved video games my whole life,
Yeah.
but for some reason I never thought of it as something I could do.
Sure.
It's like, I don't, who were making video games except people that had the jobs doing them, you
Right.
know? I don't know why I never thought of that. But yeah, it wasn't until college that I was actually doing animation, just like, 2D animation generally oriented for like film and TV, that I thought like, well, what if I do this in games?
Hmm.
It helped that Way Forward was actually like a few minutes away from my college,
Nice.
and so they recruit a lot of CalArts students just because they're right there.
Right.
And so they came to like our job fair. It was actually then I had my stuff at the job fair. I did not get noticed by anyone except Family Guy.
Okay.
Family Guy sent me or requested like a storyboard test from me.
All right.
And then Matt Bozon of Way Forward noticed my stuff. And that's actually kind of how my relationship with Way Forward started.
Wow. So in an alternate universe, there is Mariel Cartwright working on Family Guy and just animating
Yeah.
Peter Griffin with like an amazing rack and like excellent legs and everything.
Okay, I was gonna cry, but this actually sounds pretty good.
I may ask for a commission or something later because I feel like that needs to happen. So what was it like going to school for art? Like I went to school I went to a liberal arts college. I studied mostly philosophy and a bunch of other stuff. And as someone at a liberal arts college, almost nothing that you learn in class is explicitly related to a craft or any kind of job preparation. Whereas, like, from what I understand of CalArts, it's pretty good at placing its grads in like work in the industry, right? So
Right.
like, what does it look like when you go to school specifically to get good at something, and something is relatively like that is a trade, right? Like animation.
Right. So there are a couple things that CalArts does differently from other art schools, and I think it has a big impact on like the reason why it places so many people at like Disney and Pixar and stuff. I mean, this is how I see it, anyways. One thing is that you're in school for 4 years, and every single year you're there, including your first year, you have to make a short film.
Mm-hmm.
And so just from the get-go, you are learning how to write stories. You
Yeah.
have to learn how to compose shots. You have to learn how to edit. You have to do sound. And obviously you have to learn how to animate. And you have to learn all these things. And then in the last few months of school, you have to put together a short film.
Mm-hmm.
And like making you do that from the very start, just like throwing all these 18 and 20-year-olds just straight into it, I think forces them to learn super quick.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of other animation schools just focus on like classes for 3 years, and then your fourth year you'll make a film. And I think the way CalArts does it really forces you to apply everything you've learned like immediately, whether it's terrible or not. And mine was terrible. There were a lot of student films that I think people wouldn't be proud of now, but like the amount that you learn just from having to do it yourself is just incredible. And I think the other thing that they did, I think it's a resource that a lot of schools don't have, but every student gets their own workspace on campus.
Nice.
And so when you start off, you're usually like sharing a cubicle with like one or two other people. Third and fourth years might get their own cubicle. But from the very start, you go to class and then you go back to your cube where you're just surrounded by all your classmates, and you get to work. And I think there was just this like vibe of like competition. It was really fun. You get to know everyone so well. And I think just like helping each other and like feeding off each other, competing with each other just like really helps everyone push themselves, because you're so aware of what everyone else is doing.
Sure.
And I think, they just kind of like give you this little environment to really thrive with all your other classmates.
Okay. So when I look in general at kind of the process of learning a craft, it seems to me that the two, like, they're kind of two distinct periods that pretty much determine whether you're going to keep on doing it or not, right? So one is the starting phase, and it sounds like you kind of grew up with art as a habit, and so it was about just like taking those inclinations and taking like kind of the opportunities that your parents had raised you with and pointing them towards animation instead of illustration, right? But then the second thing I'm interested in, and this is something that I feel like you could speak to as someone who has proven themselves multiple times in your field, is like, what's like a notable plateau that you've encountered and how did you push past it, right? Like a stumbling block that you're like, that you actually had to consciously think about, oh, how do I get better at this?
Man, my whole life is plateaued. Like, constantly. It's like, even just the other day, I just said to my boyfriend, Tyson, like, oh my God, I can't color. Like,
well, so that's a fantastic example then. Like, what are you going to do about it?
I don't know.
Well, how have you overcome these kind of plateaus?
Yeah, I mean, it's just about admitting where you suck, trying to identify your flaws objectively and being like, okay, well, what steps can I take to get better at this? And it's, in the case of like, I want to learn to color better. I think my problem is that I don't look and study enough things, look at and study. Like, we just saw Kung Fu Panda 3 the other day.
Good! Oh my God,
good.
That movie was beautiful.
It was, like, the whole time I was just thinking, like, oh my God, I want to go home and I want to do color studies. And I don't do color studies. Yeah. Like, in general, I'm pretty guilty of not doing enough studies and, like, reference work in general, which goes back to, like, I always want to be original thing. Like, I'm even terrified to just like study things because of that. But I guess, like in terms of like just using the color stuff as an example, what I want to do is just like take some screenshots of Kung Fu Panda and copy them basically, and just redraw them and really try to understand why they made this choice, why it works, all that kind of stuff. And then apply it back to my own work. Like there's a lot of times I'll see an artist that's decent, but like very lacking in like a certain area. And I think in a case like that, you have to be like, oh, I'm not good at this specific thing. Sometimes it can be like hard to see that for yourself. Like it's hard to see that in your own work. So maybe it'd help to have someone that tells you suck at a thing.
So right there, like in that story you're telling, you have a few interesting points, right? Like one is that you have techniques available. You know what you're supposed to do to improve your colors. You just don't do it, right? Yeah. And the second is you're bad at colors, right? Or at least you think you're bad at colors, right? Like I don't know where you stack rank in terms of like the most, from every animator in the world, whether you're the worst or the second worst or whatever. But
it's the worst, basically.
But like. So was that awareness in those techniques? Like, was that stuff you learned in school, or was that stuff that you came into beforehand?
Oh, man. You know what? I think school set a great foundation, but I still never learned as quick as working professionally. Because at school, the only thing that's on the line is yourself. And it's very easy to not care when it's just about yourself.
Yeah.
But as soon as you're working for someone and something bigger than you is at stake, you care more and you think about getting it right. And so, as soon as I started working for like Way Forward, and then I worked on Scott Pilgrim, it was like, oh, I'm contributing to this bigger thing. I don't want to hold it back, so I have to get better. And I think that way I actually learned like a lot of stuff super quick.
Interesting.
Even though like I wouldn't have gotten to that point without the foundation that school set.
Yeah.
But there were still a lot of lessons to be learned after school.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you're pretty motivated by the people around you, and you're like in this context, it's like Mariel Cartwright can improve, but it sounds like you don't improve necessarily for your own sake. You improve to make the work better and to kind of to meet the expectations of your teammates, and it's less about like have you like what was the last time you worked on something that was completely individual end to end? Was it in school?
I don't know. It's hard to find time, honestly. Like I have all these ideas for like short stories, and like I want to make like a clock tower kind of horror game. Like I have all these ideas for I would love to. I want to do it.
That game terrifies me just reading like FAQs and watching endings.
Oh my god, it's my favorite game. It's so good. And it's something that I think I could do. It's a point and click adventure. It's all 2D. It's viewed from the side, so I could animate it. It's like I think I'd be able to do it. It's just a matter of like, do I have the time? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my biggest hurdle. In a very like specific case to me, it's that I have to take a lot of freelance work to pay my rent.
Yeah.
Because Skullgirls did not pay me enough money to live. So yeah, I'm constantly working, and so I don't have that time to invest in bettering myself.
Right.
That isn't to say that as soon as I had the time, I would become the most super productive, amazing person ever. I would probably play more video games that I don't have the time to play right now. But yeah, right now it's definitely a matter of just like I don't have the time to invest in that stuff.
Well, Lainey Chan in chat right now is asking if you're taking unpaid interns to work on your point and click adventure game. So it sounds like you can use other people at least.
Oh man, that'd be cool.
Yeah. So far what we've learned from this show is that Mariel is a fraud. She's not interested in bettering herself, and she's an imposter. Great.
Yep. Sums me up really well.
So I don't want to run too far over time, but I do want to delve a little bit into the aesthetic that kind of imbues and connects a lot of your work. Right, like we can just cut this off right now, and I can save that for another day. Or if you've got like 10 or 15 minutes, we can talk.
No, we can go over it. Let's go over it.
Okay, cool, awesome. So one of the first things that I feel like pretty much anyone notices upon certainly looking at your personal work stream or whatever is that you are really good at and really taken with drawing like very attractive and shapely women. Like if I had to describe Mariel Cartwright as an artist in one sentence, it would be like the one that actually knows how boobs work.
Hey.
I hope that's not underwhelming, but seriously, like, oh my god, especially and this is I mean no disrespect to the Street Fighter V team, but yeah, I wasn't feeling the boob animation so much in what I've seen of the beta. In any case, I want to know how you got there, right? Because that is something like as far as like figuring out what you like to draw and then getting good at it, but also like the fact that you're doing like very very kind of sexual work, right? Like there's definitely a sexual undercurrent. It feels like to seeing a lot of that stuff. Like I want to know how you got there. Right? Like, what were the kind of the formative steps in kind of understanding, oh, this is a thing that I like to do. I'm going to do more of it. I'm going to get really good at it.
So, I mean, from the very start, we talked about that I was just into, certain characters.
Yeah, I mean, Cammy and then Dead or Alive. Like, when you're telling me that, I was like, wow, I'm really not surprised by that at all.
Yeah. Tifa was a big one. For some reason, I attracted to like cool female characters,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting because I actually started off drawing Sonic.
Okay.
Sonic was my life from 6 to 12 or so.
Oh my god.
Yeah. I could have turned out way differently.
So if I Google Mariel the Hedgehog, am I going to find your work?
Oh man, not mine, but there is probably no. There's definitely like Mariel the Hedgehog drawings. I used to pretend that Sonic was my boyfriend when I was like 7.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was it, like Chili Dog Sonic in like the weekday cartoons, or strictly the video game because you grew up with a Genesis, or what?
I read the Archie comics.
Oh my god!
I had a subscription to that, which is funny because now I'm dating someone who works on them.
That's pretty cool, and also I'm never going to be intimidated by you ever again.
Yeah. So I started off drawing Sonic characters, but even then, I always liked drawing Sally and Bunny and just like the females of the Sonic universe. And I never really drew Amy that much, actually.
I mean, why would you? Sonic's your boyfriend.
That's true. Amy actually wasn't a huge deal when I was growing up because she only was in Sonic CD, and I'm going to talk about something else now. So it wasn't actually until I was like 10, 11, 12 that I started drawing like people.
Okay.
So I went from Sonic, and then I just tried to draw anime.
Mm-hmm.
And the first 2 mangas I had, I remember, I think I was in like 4th or 5th grade, and my dad gave me Ranma and Oh My Goddess.
Okay.
And they were books that he had for himself, and he's like, you can have these now.
Oh, that's really sweet.
And so that was where I started just like getting into manga more, and then that kind of like dominated most of my teens.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, still like throughout, I was always just like attracted to girls.
Yeah.
And I've only actually dated men, like been in relationships with men. But I'm still like attracted to girls.
Sure.
I have like a weird relationship with my own sexuality where I've only dated men, but I don't particularly find men attractive.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird to say. It's like I'm very attracted to the person that I'm dating, but apart from that, I don't recognize like good looks in men.
Yeah.
Whereas in women, I'm just like all over that.
Yep.
You know.
I mean, like, Lord knows I can relate as a very straight guy. It is like I have to ask my like straight women friends or gay dude friends like what attractive looks like in a guy, because otherwise, like, if you ask me, oh, is so and so attractive, I basically have to like think about whether I could see this guy on the cover of like Rolling Stone or something, and that's my reference point, right? Like, it's
right. It's like I recognize that other people find this dude attractive, or if it's like someone that has like a specific personality that I find attractive, like I like Solid Snake because I think he's cool otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, just going off looks alone, I actually have like a very poor gauge of what I find attractive physically on men. But like a very honed in gauge when it comes to women. Like, I don't know exactly where that came from, but I mean, it's like asking anyone why they're straight or gay. It's like you just are, you know?
Gotcha.
So I think that's kind of that.
Okay, so then, I mean, in a very like literal sense, like a lot of your work is just is informed by what you're attracted to.
Yeah.
Right. That's funny to me, mostly because the other day AVB was tweeting about like how in a lot of like kind of typical high school English classes, no one ever asked if the author is horny while they're writing something. And that actually explains like a lot of classic literature and the way women are written is like, oh, the dude who's writing this, huge boner like the
Yeah.
entire time for like 6 hours a session or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like that would explain so much, and yet we're kind of encouraged to not think about that. But whenever a woman writes, especially a male character, similarly, right? There's some kind of like lascivious undertone or whatever, and people like maybe she would,
Right.
it's fucking garbage. But that's interesting to me. So that if that's kind of like where that your personal aesthetic and style kind of originated, like, was there ever a point at which people were like, "Yo, you shouldn't do that," or you should be careful about this or something? Because it seems to me that like when I see your work, I'm like, wow, that is A, super fucking awesome, and B, like there's a certain kind of bravery that I would attach with it, just because I would assume that any woman being like producing sexual work of any kind is going to get a whole lot of attention she probably doesn't want.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the very start I was always like attracted to weird things. Like, I like pretty girls. May or may not know that I'm also into like horror and I like gory stuff and all that. So like from the very start, just being an artist, like drawing was the outlet for all those things that I liked.
Sure.
And it was like if someone told me not to draw something, which has happened, it's like, well, why wouldn't I? This is how I get that stuff out of my head.
Right.
Like, that's not to say that I don't have fears about putting certain works online. Like, I've kind of toned down the amount of like gore kind of stuff that I post. Like, I don't post that stuff as much. Like, I think that's just in part like I'm aware that I have a lot more eyes on my work now.
Right.
So that's also like a different kind of like weird thing.
Have any like teachers or like your parents, have they ever pulled you aside and been like, we're either like we're not sure about this, or you should know that like I can imagine like a mentor in college going up to you and being like, well, that will potentially disqualify you from taking certain kinds of work or something like that, right?
I think that's never happened where someone has said like you need to stop doing this. I think mostly it's just like you're weird. Are you a lesbian? That kind of stuff. Though, so I dated a guy from age 16 to 20, and at the time he had a little 5-year-old brother.
Okay.
And I remember meeting his parents like very early on, and I don't know why, I wish they hadn't, but his dad, who was a very large, intimidating man, flipped through my sketchbook. And this, I was in high school, I was angsty.
Sure.
And I was just drawing like a lot of super skinny girls that were like cut up and bloody. And I think like for a long time, like he flipped through my sketchbook, and for a long time afterwards, I think his dad didn't like me because he thought like I was weird and crazy. They were also like very Christian.
Sure.
Like I think I just made a really bad impression on his dad from like my sketchbook, and also that I was super shy, and he thought like I was mean to his little brother, like when I was just shy. Yeah, I don't know. It's always weird because my art is the way I want to like express certain things, but I do still have a fear of like, oh, is this too much? Especially now, I think, like kind of like the culture and environment that we're in, we're very hyper aware of like the meaning and like the implications of the work we put out, which is good. But my personal struggle is like, when do I stop putting myself into something and start thinking about, what other people are seeing about me? And that's something I still have a hard time with.
So how is that kind of style and aesthetic evolved over time? And where do you see it going, right? Because like right now what you're describing is like it seems like it's coming from a pretty core part of you, right? Like you're using that, like this stuff is all manifestations of you, and when people encounter your work online, like this is kind of an insight into your brain and kind of the source of your creative energies. And I'm wondering like what like do you have any ideas? Have you seen it change kind of over the last couple of years? Do you see it changing as you exit your 20s and go into your 30s, right? Like what is the, Mariel Cartwright's art look 5 or 10 years from now?
Um, I guess like in my teens and early 20s, a lot of I guess I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about like the gore part because I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that's changed the most.
Yeah.
Um, Back then, I was focused on just drawing uh, people in pain.
Hmm.
Like it wasn't always that way. A lot of the times, it was like just weird or out there or goofy. But there was a lot more like just pain in my art. Um, and I think from there, like I still love horror. I love body horror, like Cronenberg, weird kind of shit. But I think as far as like those tones in my work go now,
Hmm.
I think it's more just about being like weird and unusual. It could still be scary, but I don't want to see like I don't get off on girls' faces scrunched up in pain.
Sure.
Um, and that's not to say that I did before, but it was still something that you saw in my work
Right.
more. Um,
What is it
and
about that specifically that like would be kind of an element that you chose to remove?
um,
Because you could have mentioned like I don't get off to like missing arms or something, but the face,
right.
it seems like there's something that you've kind of focused on with the face specifically and the meaning of a facial expression.
Right. I mean, I think it was just exposure over the years to so much other gory art. Like I used to go to Guro-chan, which was I don't know if it's still around, just an old image board for Guro art,
Hmm.
where so much of it was focused on the artist wanting to destroy women.
Holy
And
shit.
yeah, like literally destroying women.
Hmm.
Um, and that became kind of like a turnoff where my interest in that stuff was always more in just like the weird and unusual, you
Hmm.
know? Um, and so, while I still love that stuff, I just seeing people in pain, like just that,
Yeah.
for that reason, just because you like that, that's not really appealing to me.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I guess that's it.
So it's I just want you to know that like I think the work you're doing is awesome, and
Thank you.
part of what I want to put out here is like when I see your work and and it's very sexual, and then um, it gets read as misogynist, or if I saw your work that is that is showing women in pain and it could be read again as misogynist and sadistic, like it is super important to me that you keep on doing that stuff and that you keep on being articulate about where your work comes from and why, because like I want people to be able to see that kind of work and not immediately arrive at conclusions, right? Like I think it's super empowering and super important to see a woman exploring those kinds of work and those themes and acknowledging that they come from a different place, right?
That
And I
is
think
so nice to hear, honestly, because yeah, like I haven't been posting like the weird stuff, the weird and gory stuff recently because I've honestly been scared of the backlash.
yeah.
I've now seen how people will try to dig up stuff about you and post it like, here's something you did in 2006. Let's see it destroy you because, the same person you're the same person you were in 2006, and it's like it's not the case. People are changing constantly. But because I'm now scared of those kind of people coming up from the fucking depths of hell to destroy me, um, I haven't been posting that kind of work.
Yeah, I
Um,
think, and this is speaking as someone who does like, I mean, like I work in publishing, right? I think there's a lot of work that artists can learn about couching their work to make I guess, their background, their thought process, and that kind of stuff more transparent, right? Like, there's you want the work to stay the same, but like you know, I mean, even in a museum or something, occasionally you'll see like an artist statement or something like that, right? And I think I totally relate to you about the kind of the fear of sharing stuff, and like seeing your work, I just looked at that and I was like, there's got to be some kind of doubt or some kind of fear in there, because I know what it's like to put yourself out there on the internet, and I feel like to me now I'm thinking, oh, well, what is Mariel going to be doing in 10 years? I don't know, but if you get good at talking about your work the way you do on the stream, I feel like that's going to inspire other people, and that's going to inspire some really cool conversations about like about the thematic nature of your work. So that's super awesome, and I hope you keep it up, and I hope you keep talking about it, because like that stuff is like, I don't know, I want to see people citing you when they're talking about like women doing gory stuff or sexy stuff or whatever, right? And to a large part, like I want you to feel like you fucking own that medium and that theme and whatever, right? Like that it's not just bullshit that other people can kind of use against you when starting a witch hunt or whatever.
Right. Thank you. That's really nice to hear, because I do try to just like post art, not say anything, and just like kind of like disappear again, and then post something stupid later. So it is actually really nice to hear that you also value what I think about the stuff I post. Because I don't think I'm very smart, but it's still nice to hear that maybe I do have something to say.
Absolutely. I think there's no doubt that you have something to say, and it's manifested in your work. But and this is like kind of selfishly the reason why I started the show, was to talk to people about the stuff they do, because I am weirdly good at talking to people about things that they are passionate about, right? So like I want all of us to get better at talking about where our work comes from and the context in which it lives, because the more we do to start that conversation, the more power we have over where it goes. And that's just kind of where I'm at. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. If you have any ending shout outs or anything, I'd love to hear them.
I mean, Indivisible is going to take a while. Don't worry about that right now. But
where can people find your work?
Let's see. I mean, I have a Tumblr. It's just kinukcakes.tumblr.com. I don't post terribly often on there, but I don't like reblog. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't post like other things on it. It's just my work.
Cool.
So there's that. I post on Twitter a lot. If you want more frequent art updates from me, that's where I've been posting them. I have an Instagram, but I only post photos from trips on it. It's very boring.
You got a lot of nice sunsets on there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I guess that's kind of it.
Right.
I'm just around,
Well, that's Mariel Cartwright, ladies and gentlemen. She is a freak and weird and a hack.
Yay.
And just around.
I'm so glad that that's what we got out of this.
The other thing I hope for you in 10 years is that like you show up on my stream, and hopefully I'm still doing this, and you're like, well, I'm a badass bitch. I'm way better than everyone. Blah, 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 blah. I'm going to go hang out with Lady Gaga.
No,
Peace.
I'm going to be dead. That's what's going to happen.
Oh, God.
So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for showing up tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm going to say right now that I'm threatening to invite you on here again after I've run through a good amount of guests, because there's way more that I want to talk to you about. But
yeah, I wish I had more time.
I know you have a life and you have other things to do besides talk to my ass on stream. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
To everyone who's tuning in to the stream, if you're a regular viewer, thanks so much. I say this every time, but y'all are the reason why I keep doing this. I know a lot of really cool people, and I want to get them to talk more about the shit they're doing, because it's fucking awesome, and hopefully it inspires you to do some fucking awesome shit too. To the people who have tuned in for the first time, I mostly talk about fighting games, but once a week, Mondays at 7, I interview people who largely work with fighting games, but we'll see if like every now and then I get a chance to talk with someone awesome, has nothing to do with fighting games or whatever. But really, like, all I'm trying to do is just talk to cool people who are doing amazing shit and see if they can tell us a little bit about kind of what goes into it and where it came from. So if that sounds like you're something into, stop by. It's so far it's been every Monday at 7. You can just click the little follow button underneath the player. I'd really appreciate a follow. Like, this kind of stuff is just stuff I do in my free time, but like, you know, when I meet people like Mariel and I get to know them, I just have to help like share their shit and the kind of thoughts that go into it. So thank you so much for streaming. If you didn't catch the whole thing, the VOD will be on youtube.com/pattheflip. Just like in the Twitch TV URL, it's Pat the Flip. I think it's right here. There we go. So you can watch the whole thing, share it with your friends, like, and I've mentioned this before, but if people have suggestions for people that they want me to talk to on Skype for like an hour or two, by all means send them my way. I think you can just @ me on Twitter and hit me up. So yeah, thanks again for watching. Peace out, y'all.
Bye.